Hair scraped back so hard it left a mark on my mother-in-law's hardwood floor. Everyone at the Thanksgiving table heard it. No one said a word. My father-in-law stood, wineglass raised, the kind of slow, deliberate rise that tells a room something is coming. He smiled the way men smile when they've already decided the outcome of a conversation. "Before we eat," he said, "I think it's time we talked about helping Donnie get back on his feet. And since Celeste is doing so well," he turned and looked directly at me, not at his own son, at me. "We figured this would be a good year for her to step up for the family. The people are slowly being, my sister-in-law had her fork halfway to her mouth. My husband, sitting right beside me, went very quiet in a way I recognized. The way he went quiet when he already knew something I didn't. Then my mother-in-law reached over and patted my hand without asking permission to touch me. "We're not asking for much," she said softly, like she was doing me a favor. "Donnie just needs someone to carry him a little. And you've always been the strong one." I looked at my husband. He looked at his plate. I set my napkin down, folded it once, and said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." And then I smiled, because I had been raised to smile first. "This is the last holiday I'll be having this conversation." No one laughed. Someone's kid asked for more rolls. The table pretended that hadn't just happened. But my mother-in-law's hand had gone stiff on top of mine, and I felt the shift the same way you feel a car sliding on ice. That specific second when you know the skid has already started. "My name is Celeste Harmon. I'm 32 years old. I'm a senior project manager at a logistics company in Columbus, Ohio, and for the last 4 years, I have been the unofficial financial cushion for a family that was not born into mine. I married into it. I married well," people said. What they meant was I married a man I genuinely loved, and what came attached to that man was a dynamic I didn't fully understand until I was already deep inside it. My brother-in-law Donnie is 29. He has never held a job longer than 8 months. Not because the economy failed him, not because of circumstances outside his control, though that was always the story his parents told, but because Donnie has spent his adult life being saved before consequences could reach him. Every time he quit, there was a reason. Every time he was let go, someone else was to blame. Every time the rent came due and his account was short, a phone call went out. Usually to his parents first. And then, once I entered the picture with my salary and my savings account, and my habit of saying yes when I should have said absolutely not, those calls started, including a detour through my husband. I didn't catch it at first. The first time felt like love. We'd been married 8 months when Donnie called in a panic about a landlord threatening eviction. $1,500. My husband asked if we could help. I said of course, because that's what you do when your family is in trouble. "We'd get it back in a few weeks," he said. We never did. The second time was a car. The third time was a payday loan that had gotten out of hand. By the fourth time, they'd stopped framing it as borrowing. It had become something closer to an expectation, like a bill that had my name on it that I never agreed to sign. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Donnie was just going through a rough patch. His parents would say things like, "He's sensitive, and he didn't have the same opportunities you did." And I'd nod and wire the money and go back to working the 60-hour weeks that made the money possible in the first place. What I didn't say, what I should have said years earlier, was that I had worked 2 jobs through college. I had graduated with debt and no safety net and no parents standing behind me with a cushion. I had built every single thing I had by myself, carefully, at real cost. And now I was watching it quietly redistribute towards someone who had never once been made to feel the weight of his own choices. That Thanksgiving, something changed. Maybe it was the way my father-in-law had looked at me and not at his own son when he said the word "step up." Maybe it was my husband's silence, that practiced, deliberate silence I'd seen too many times. Maybe it was my mother-in-law's hand on mine, the presumption of it, the ownership in that small gesture. Whatever it was, something that had been bending for a long time finally held its shape and refused to bend further. I didn't make a scene. I drove home that evening steady and quiet, watching the interstate lights blur past the passenger window while my husband drove and said nothing, and I let him say nothing because I needed to think. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I knew what I was going to do. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. 3 days later, my mother-in-law showed up at our house on a Tuesday morning. She didn't call ahead. She knocked twice and walked in because she has a key, a fact that had bothered me since the day they gave it to themselves, framed as a gift, and I had smiled and said thank you. She sat down at my kitchen table and looked at me the way she always does when she needs something. Like she's about to deliver news I'll be grateful for once I calm down. Donnie is really struggling, she said. His roommate is moving out and he can't cover the full rent alone. We've done what we can, but you know how it is. I poured myself coffee. I sat down across from her. I didn't offer her any. How much? I asked. She blinked. She wasn't used to me skipping the part where I asked questions and expressed concern and made her feel heard. 2 months, just to give him time to find someone. How much per month? 1,400. I looked at her for a long moment. I paid his security deposit 2 years ago, I said. I covered his car insurance for 6 months the year before that, and I co-signed his credit application last spring because. She waved her hand. That was different. That was just to get him started. I co-signed it, I said slowly, because you told me it wouldn't affect anything, that it was just a formality. It was, she said. He's been making his payments. Has he? She shifted in her chair. Mostly. That word landed like something cold. Mostly. I had co-signed a credit line I'd barely read because my mother-in-law sat in the same chair and told me it was a formality and I had trusted her. And now I was sitting here learning that mostly was the status of payments connected to my name, my credit, my financial history that I had spent a decade protecting. I didn't raise my voice. I thanked her for coming and told her I needed to look into a few things. She left looking pleased, which told me she thought that meant yes. It didn't mean yes. My husband came home that evening to find me at the dining room table with my laptop open and a legal pad beside it. I'd spent 4 hours pulling every document I could find, the credit cosign, the original loan paperwork from the car situation, every Venmo and bank transfer I could trace going back 3 years. The number I arrived at was not a number I had ever said out loud. I said it out loud now to my husband when he sat down across from me. He was quiet for a long moment. I didn't realize it was that much. I did, I said. I just didn't let myself add it up. He ran his hand over his face. They're his parents, they can't just. I'm not his parents, I said. I'm his sister-in-law, and I co-signed a credit line I didn't fully read because someone in this family told me it was fine, and apparently it is not fine. He didn't have an answer for that. What he had instead was the particular silence of a man who loves his family more than he is capable of managing them, and who has let the gap between those two things be filled by someone else for years. I had been that someone else. I had filled it without being asked, without being thanked, and without being told how large that gap actually was. I was done filling it. The next morning, I called a financial advisor I'd worked with once before, a woman named Rochelle, who does not soften things unnecessarily, and who I trusted exactly because of that. I laid it all out for her, the cosign, the informal transfers, the pattern. She listened without interrupting, and then she asked me one question. Do you want to contain the damage or do you want to exit completely? I told her I wanted to exit completely. What followed was not dramatic. There was no confrontation, no raised voices, no moment where I stood up and delivered a speech. I sent an email to the credit company, polite, formal, requesting information about my liability status and the process for removing myself as a co-signer. I found out Donnie had, in fact, missed 2 payments, which had already created a small but real ding on my credit report. I filed to have myself removed from the account. The process of paperwork and several weeks in one very unpleasant phone call with a representative who explained my options in terms that were not particularly encouraging, but it was possible and I started it. I also changed the locks on my house and asked for the spare key back. I told my husband first. He went pale and then nodded because he could see, for the first time, what I had been carrying, and I think some part of him was relieved that someone was finally putting it down. The reaction from his family took 4 days to arrive. My father-in-law called my husband, then he called me directly. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 7 minutes long and that I listened to once, sitting in my car in the parking garage at work, and then deleted. The general shape of it was, "We are disappointed. Donnie is in a very difficult position. This is not the behavior we expected from someone who married into this family. And if Celeste cannot find it in herself to help, then we will have to reconsider our relationship with her. I sat with my phone in my hands for a minute after it ended. Then I went inside and had the most productive workday I'd had in months. My mother-in-law's approach was different. She texted me a series of messages over 2 days, each one slightly more escalating than the last. The first was disappointed, the second was hurt, the third told me that I had always seemed cold, and that she had tried to love me like a daughter, but that this proved she'd never really known me. The fourth, and this was the one that told me everything I needed to understand about the situation. The fourth said simply, "Donnie didn't sleep last night. I hope you're happy." I read that, and I thought, I'm not the reason Donnie didn't sleep. I am not the person who failed Donnie. I am the person who was handed his consequences for years, and now that I've given them back, somehow that makes me responsible for his sleep schedule. I didn't respond to any of the texts. My husband and I had hard conversations, real ones, the kind that neither of us had been willing to have before because they cost something. He admitted that he had known in a quiet way that the balance was off, that he had let it continue because confronting his parents felt impossible, and because I never broke, and because it was easier to let the system keep running than to stop it. He said this without me asking him to. He said it sitting on the edge of our bed at 11 at night with the lights still on, and it was the most honest thing he had said to me in 2 years of marriage. I told him I wasn't angry at him. I was tired of being the solution to problems that weren't mine to solve. He said he understood. I think he did. I think for the first time, he actually did. 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, my father-in-law called my husband and asked for a family meeting. My husband told me about it the same night. He said it was up to me whether I went. I went, not because I owed them an appearance, but because I had nothing left to be afraid of. And there is something clarifying about walking into a room where you no longer have anything to lose. It was at their house. My mother-in-law had made coffee and set out a plate of cookies, which was either a peace offering or a prop. With her it was always hard to tell. Donnie wasn't there, which was notable. My father-in-law sat across from me in his good chair and spoke in the measured, reasonable voice of a man who has decided he is the adult in the room. He said they were concerned about the direction things were heading. He said family was about give and take. He said that Celeste, he used my full name, slow, deliberate, had always seemed like someone who understood sacrifice. He said he hoped we could find a way to move forward together. I waited until he finished. Then I said, I've spent 4 years contributing to Donnie's stability. I did it because I love my husband and I wanted to support his family. But what I've learned is that what I was actually doing was preventing Donnie from having to become an adult, and I don't think that helped him. I think it made things worse, so I'm not going to keep doing it. Not because I don't care, but because I do. My mother-in-law's eyes went sharp. That's very easy to say when nothing's on the line for you. Nothing's on the line for me, I said, because I spent a decade making sure of that. I built my stability on purpose. Donnie can too. He just hasn't had to yet. No one said anything for a moment. My father-in-law exhaled slowly. So that's it? You made up your mind? I made up my mind 6 weeks ago, I said. I came today because my husband asked me to, and because I respect him enough to be in the room, but my answer isn't changing. We drove home in silence, my husband and I, and he reached over somewhere around the 3rd mile and took my hand without saying anything. I let him hold it. That felt like enough. What happened after that was not a dramatic collapse. It was quieter than I expected. Donnie found a roommate by January, a co-worker, someone his own age who needed to split rent. He got a job at a logistics company, which my husband told me with a kind of careful neutrality, watching to see if I'd react. I didn't. I was glad. I had never wanted Donnie to fail. I had wanted him to be required to try, which is a different thing entirely. My in-laws reduced their contact with me significantly. We saw them at Christmas, briefly, and it was polite in the way that things are polite when people have decided not to fight anymore, but also have not decided to understand each other. My mother-in-law hugged me at the door. It was short and stiff. I hugged her back. My husband and I are still working through it. Not the family stuff, but the layer underneath. The part where I had quietly resented for years something I never said out loud. the part where he had quietly known and looked the other way. We're in couples therapy now, which is the least dramatic and most useful thing that has come out of all of this. Our therapist is patient and direct, and she does not let either of us hide behind the word family when what we actually mean is, I was afraid. There's a thing I keep coming back to, something my therapist said early on that I've turned over probably 100 times since. She said generosity is only generosity when it's a choice. When it's expected, it becomes something else. I thought about every Thanksgiving, every phone call, every transfer, every time I said yes because the alternative felt like abandonment. None of it had ever been a choice. It had been a tax I paid on belonging somewhere, and I had paid it for 4 years before I even understood what it was. On New Year's Eve, my husband and I stayed home. We ordered Thai food and watched a movie we'd both been meaning to see for months and never had. At midnight, he poured 2 glasses of sparkling water because neither of us felt like wine, and he raised his glass and I raised mine, and he said, "To next year being ours." I didn't say anything. I just touched my glass to his. That was enough. That was more than enough. The year behind us had cost me something real, money, yes, and time, and a version of this family I had wanted to belong to. But what it gave back was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing, the particular quiet of a life that belongs to you. The particular weight of a choice made freely with nothing owed to no one. I used to think that walking away from something meant you'd given up. I know now it sometimes means you finally showed up. For the right person, in the right direction, at exactly the right time. There's something nobody tells you about being the responsible one in a family, that the longer you do it without complaint, the more invisible it becomes. Not invisible in a grateful way. Invisible the way a wall becomes invisible. You stop seeing it because it's always been there, holding things up, and you only notice it when it's gone. That's what I kept thinking about after everything settled. Not about the money, though the money was real, and the number was larger than I had ever let myself say out loud. I kept thinking about how long I had accepted a version of things that wasn't true, that I was helping because I chose to, that it was temporary, that Donnie would stabilize, that my mother-in-law's hand on mine at that Thanksgiving table was warmth and not ownership. I had the information to see it clearly for years. I just didn't use it, and that more than anything is what I had to sit with. What changed wasn't the Thanksgiving announcement. That was just the moment I finally let myself be honest. What changed was the morning I opened my laptop and pulled up 4 years of records and actually looked at them. That's when something shifted. Not anger, not heartbreak, but clarity. The kind that comes when you stop managing your feelings about a situation and just look at the situation itself. I understood then that intelligence isn't just about being smart at work or knowing the right answers in a meeting. It's about being willing to apply that same clear-eyed thinking to your own life, to the stories you've been telling yourself, to the arrangements you've let calcify into obligations. I had been smart in every room except the one that mattered most. The discipline piece, the willingness to actually do the hard thing once I saw it, that came from somewhere I didn't expect. It wasn't anger that got me through the paperwork, the phone calls, the family meeting, the weeks of cold silence from people I had genuinely tried to love. It was just steadiness. The same steadiness that got me through college on 2 jobs, that built the career they'd been drawing from for years without crediting. I already knew how to hold a difficult thing and keep moving. I just hadn't applied it here. And then there was the question of what was right, not what was easy, not what would keep the peace, but what was actually right. For years I had confused keeping the peace with being good. I thought absorbing other people's consequences made me a generous person. What I understand now is that it made me an enabler, and that enabling isn't kindness. It's fear dressed up as love. Donnie is not a worse person for finally having to figure things out. He found a roommate. He found a job. He's doing what he was always capable of doing. The difference is that someone stopped catching him before he had to. There are consequences to every pattern, and they move in both directions. The consequences of giving too much without limits showed up in my credit report, in my resentment, in the quiet erosion of a marriage that had been leaking trust for years. And the consequences of finally stopping showed up too, in my husband reaching for my hand in the car, in the therapist's office where we were finally saying true things in the New Year's Eve that was quiet, and ours, and enough. I don't think of what I did as walking away. I think of it as finally walking in the right direction, which is all any of us can really do, once we're honest enough to see where we've been going and steady enough to change it.